approach. So the CPUT team, if I could just introduce the team who's working on the project. Currently we have Professor Mohammed Nakhooda, Dr. Liesl Hudson, who couldn't be here. She's had to chair another international conference. Prof. Sean Oyekola, Dr. Hanli Dippenaar, Mr. Louis Mapatagani, and myself, Dr. Cupido. So thank you once again for joining us. So just as an introduction to our project, as a participant university, being keenly aware of the diversity of students entering higher education, at CPUT we started looking more closely and doing an introspection of the kinds of support measures in place provided to students to ensure both academic and personal development to entering students. What's important about what's important about this is that increasingly the student bodies become a lot more diverse. Students all come from different backgrounds, they come from different quintile schools, they have different experiences, and it was important for us as a university to consider how this may influence a student experience. And so when we started looking at student support, we needed to scope the experience of the student from the first click, from the first time a student attempts an application through to successful graduation. I think as we're all aware that even though students are gaining entry into university, what we're really needing to explore and understand a lot more deeply is why students aren't succeeding at the same rate as they're accessing universities. And so for us, when we looked at our project and we started toying with ideas of what could potential titles be for the Siyaphumelela project at CPUT, we came up with the idea of first click to graduation. And what this meant for us was having to look at understanding both the historical context of where we find ourselves as a UOT, because I think UOTs are uniquely different to the traditional universities, as well as understanding the current context that we find ourselves within higher education, as well as from the student experience. So this meant that we needed to explore and understand the challenges to student success, which is both complex and dynamic based on the fact that the student body is as diverse as it is. And so at present, we needing to understand who our students are, but at the same time, we also needed to explore the current student support success, the current initiatives at CPUT that support student success from the time that they apply, from registration to onboarding students in orientation, and the kinds of other types of psychosocial support and academic support that are available to students at CPUT. And so the Siyaphumelela project at CPUT has positioned itself in this particular space. So it wants to be able to draw on the institutional memory, as well as harness the strength of the current programs, the student-centered programs, explore what data we have available to us to augment these programs with novel investigative instruments such as data mining, which we'll talk a little about a little bit later, to be able to construct a deep but also an expansive understanding of the factors that not only contribute to student success, but also to look at the potential barriers as to why students are not succeeding. Sorry, let me just get my cursor. There we go. So the aim of this project then is to, like I said previously, identify appropriate measures to support the student journey from that first click towards success, right through to graduation, and the transition points in between. So the studies also, CPUT's recently had its Vision 2030 approved. So the study is the project is very closely linked to Vision 2030 and the goal that focuses on smart student engagement and the holistic student experience. So it's really closely aligned. And the objectives that we've set for ourselves is to be able to build the capacity, not just of the students, but also to build the capacity of the staff at CPUT as part of the student experience, which we hope would be both individually transformative as well as build the social capital of the broader CPUT community. And so a further objective then would be is to embed a suite of really comprehensive and quality services for students that are both integrated, that are responsive to the needs of our diverse body of students in ways that are holistic, that considers the student well-being, creates opportunity for academic success, as well as use and supported through the use of smart technologies. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Hanli, who will deal with the underpinning theory. Thanks, Hanli.
Thank you. Thank you, Zina. And good morning, colleagues. I would like to explain our theoretical stance with regards to this project. We decided to use cultural historic activity theory as a lens to look at the different student support structures that enable or disable our student success. So chat allows us to describe the interaction between higher education institution and students in terms of an activity system, which is comprised of tools, rules, multiple participants, and the division of labor. This is based on the work of Engstrom, which originated with Vygotsky and with Leontev, as explained in the next slide. Thank you. Many of you are probably familiar with the diagram on the left, which is the visual representation of a typical activity system. So chat allows for the complexity of cultural and historic background of our institution, which was established in 2005, when different institutions were merged. So as you can see on the diagram, higher education is basically focused around a central activity of teaching and learning. So in this study, the students are seen as the subject of the activity system, with the object as students' progress. So as I've said, the outcome of higher education is then student success, and the tools that contribute at the top, the tools that contribute to that success are the different support structures. However, these tools are subject to rules within the system, and that's is portrayed by the different crisscross lines in the triangle. And these rules are determined by external structures such as management, higher education authorities, and these different elements, as we see them on the triangle, are actually interconnected and influence one another. So our study will provide us with a snapshot of the different elements and of the current situation at our institution. The next slide will give us an overview of the methodology that we are following. So this project, ladies and gentlemen, will have 4 focus areas. The first focus area, you can see at the top, is data, which we will collect from the application process, registration, and student engagement. The next focus area on the left is our first year experience, where we will focus on data on the program and resources itself, and reports from our retention officers and mentors. And then the third focus area are the different surveys that will be conducted. And these include the BUSI, the ICAD, the SASSI surveys, which many of you are probably familiar with. And lastly, but most important, at the bottom, ladies and gentlemen, is our student voices. Data from this will include focus group discussions, reflections by our students, journals written by students, and also digital stories. So that is basically how we see the theoretical background of the project. With this, I will now hand over to Sean, who will discuss this further. Thank you very much, Sean.
Hi, everyone. Mapping out students' journey pre and through the university provides insight and foresight that will ease access and enhance student success in an empathetic way. In the next slide, I'll be introducing the first focus area that emphasizes on already existing data in the university repository. And using Ubi, we'll start by unpacking application data. Remedying issues of social injustice requires focus on an understanding of qualitative factors, such as student backgrounds and experiences that they may bring into the institution. Considering the fact that learning is a social process and teaching and learning do not take place in isolation, it is essential for us to know as students in terms of where they are coming from and what they are bringing into the institution. Information that act as indices for students' socio-economic, academic background, and so on of students are captured during applications. These data can be mined because they're already in the repository and analyzed, and this will enable us to design or create a proactive approach to support our students ahead of their start of the first year. And another thing this will assist us to do is we'll be able to scaffold and coach our students so as to put in, we'll be able to scaffold and coach, and we'll also be able to put in place psychosocial, academic, technological supports, among other supports needed as appropriate. With this approach, we can marry students' readiness. So we're looking from students' perspective and from the institution's perspective. So we'll be able to marry students' readiness with the university's preparedness. And this will be from, in terms of the university's preparedness, we'll look from the institutions and lecturers' perspectives. Then after looking at the application data, we'll also, in the next slide, I'll be talking about how we'll be mining the registration data in order to achieve our objective. Will be, and this is linked to the previous data that I've talked about. So this aspect of the project will interrogate existing student registration data. And what we've done is to glean, from Achieving the Dreams work, a previous study that has been conducted. And so what we've done is to compare our 2021 registration data with Achieving the Dream repository and what they call, or inventory, what they call holistic student support discovery inventory. And so what we've done, having done that, we've been able to identify some data points, which will help us to interrogate our data in order to inform, design, and implement an ideal design for students' registration journey. So data integration from online student registration will include rather the accepted students' secondary school information, and this will tell us, or we'll also be able to obtain other biographical information of the student, which would have been obtained from the application data. Again, going back to the ATD discovery inventory I mentioned earlier on, this will help us to interrogate all relevant and related admission documents. It also helps us to use registration holds, such as financial blocks, which prevent students from proceeding to register. And we'll also be looking at the frequency and format of our communication. Are they good enough? Are we getting across the information as required? So the initial comparison will give an opportunity to critically look at the information shared with students and ask them, and thereby assisting the university stakeholders to design and assist the student in their registration journey. Over to you, Mohammed. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. The next bit of data from the focus area on data is the student engagement data. With the shift to online and remote teaching and learning, higher education institutions have been gifted with the opportunity to analyze learning patterns in a way that was not previously available at this scale. The intention is to deeply engage with the learning analytics to understand how students learn, when they learn, what they're learning, what their online learning patterns are, where the bottlenecks and pain points are in the curriculum, and engage with any other unforeseen patterns that may emerge from the data within our institutional context, as we saw in the presentation yesterday by Profs. Rabi Dunpath and Robert Law, using AutoScholar. So on the next slide, we'll show that some capacity building on learner analytics has begun at Blackboard, has begun at CPUT using Blackboard and pyramid analytics. And already a vast amount of data is available to us. With improved mining capabilities, an incredibly useful picture of teaching and learning will emerge, and we will align this to the Siyaphumelela objectives. These can be used as early warning systems to develop risk reports, to see which students may be falling behind and why the students may be falling behind. Interventions can then be tailored based on evidence and can be timeously applied. Feedback and recommendation will always be communicated to the appropriate lines and channels within the institution. The next focus area is on surveys. We will draw on information from the BUSI survey, the ICAT survey, the SASSI survey, and a few others when they become available. And in the interest of time, I'll skip the survey area because I think members of this meeting are quite familiar with these surveys. The third focus area is on student voice. So we will look at knowing our students. The student voice focus area aims to give students the agency to contribute directly to the design of interventions aligned with Siyaphumelela objectives. That said, it is student-centered, aimed at painting a picture of the student experience at CPUT. Put simply, it asks the questions like, what is it like to be a student at CPUT? Or how does the design of the institution impact on the student learning experience? By answering such questions using an anti-deficit model, we would want to seek out challenges and opportunities around student success and design strategies for amelioration and or implementation. So there are various ways envisaged to realize the outcomes of this focus area. We can look at focus group discussions, creating digital stories, facilitating discussions using podcasts, encouraging reflection, and also journaling. A lot of these activities, so a lot of these activities will be built into certain first-year courses, such as those that embed communication. We already have these, and may also be credit-bearing, thus making it compulsory for students to complete. Of course, we will draw on institutional experience, and there are very useful toolkits available on achieving the dream in those resources.
2 minutes remain.
Thank you. And the last focus area is on first-year experience. So CPUT has in place an established and vibrant first-year experience program. Most of these resources are available online for students in repositories. We have dedicated YouTube channels and Blackboard and that sort of thing. On the next slide, we'll see CPUT currently makes use of a system of student psychosocial support through mentors, peers, who report to retention officers, who in turn report to a dedicated academic member of staff in each department. So there are typically several ROs, retention officers and mentors, and first-year experience coordinators in each faculty. Retention officers and mentors are expected to submit monthly reports to academic coordinators where they detail interventions that were put in place and addressed and how those challenges were addressed. Through Siyaphumelela, we intend to further empower retention officers and mentors to develop reporting capacity to answer further questions around student support that are aligned to the questions asked in the focus area of this project. A crucially and central feature of the Siyaphumelela project at CPUT is that it will involve working groups from each focus area, working groups in each focus area with stakeholders drawn from various institutional structures. In this manner, it is hoped that a network will be created with reporting that permeates across the institution. By employing such a design, the project will be highly dynamic and responsive. In conclusion, the Siyaphumelela project at CPUT is therefore proposed to be integrated, relational, iterative, and dynamic. The strengths of existing initiatives will be harnessed and complemented with new initiatives, but aligned so that critical gaps are covered. We do not want to miss opportunities to intervene by employing a single set of tools. Hence, we look at this integrated approach. We are also very aware of turning students into convenient data points I'm almost done, please. We're also very aware of turning students into convenient data points and then derive conclusions based on simple and convenient group classifications, thereby falling into the trap of group attribution error. And we're also aware that we have to account for several more. By gathering data from a variety of qualitative and quantitative sources, we aim to understand the landscape of students using the lens of cultural historic activity theory and the humanistic approach. So there's no such thing as an average student, and we can do better than implement average interventions that suit most. We want to understand and identify how best to support each of our students on their journey to learning success as a partner of the institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Team CPUT and my ex-colleague, Mohammed. Well done. I think you guys have done a very great presentation. Thank you very much for that. And we wish you well in its implementation. Questions, comments, let's go to the chat and see. We have one from Emmanuel.
There's one question.
Yes,
from the chat
Emmanuel.
space.
Yeah, I've got that.
Thank you.
Where we go? Okay. Emmanuel, the question is, I like your decidedly non-deficit approach, really timely. May you please elaborate more on what you mean by institutional design as something that has impact on student success? I do not want to speculate on this. So over to the team.
So if I could come in, it's Zina here. I think very often we are mostly focused on student attributes and who our students are. But I think if we look at the historical context of universities, and especially UOTs as well, UOTs come from a technicon background, and in some instances where they've been mergers, college backgrounds. And so we also need to understand how the institution has been designed and who it's been designed for. And how are we shifting in terms of the support provided, in terms of the structures provided to give access to students. And so it's also important to consider, you know, whether it's at an institutional-wide design, or even down to departmental and faculty in terms of where subjects are placed, you know, how students are onboarded into the university. You know, when we all had to move quite rapidly to emergency remote teaching, we needed to be a lot more mindful of whether our students would be able to access the systems. And I think that that's something that we need to look at a lot more closely in terms of where there are systemic barriers that keep students on the outside of the university space or creates unintentional barriers. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any other team members would like to add to that? Okay. Craig, is there anything on the question and answer? Or are there any raised hands?
Not that I see. I think that was the only question in that space. Yes, there's something that is just coming. I think it's just a comment. Let me read it out.
Yes.
Let me read it out.
Tumaleng, from Tumaleng, thanks for the insightful presentation. Can you share how you have been able to use the registration holds data? What kinds of interventions have you been able to develop to address these holes, especially the financial holes? Over to the team.
Thank you. It's Mohammed. Perhaps
Mohammed,
Sean can speak to this point. It is on registration data. But just to say that what we've presented here today is a proposal. So we have a plan in place to look at this data. At present, we haven't been able to extrapolate any conclusions from the data as yet. But maybe Sean can expand on this.
Sean, over to you.
No, I think Mohammed has actually said it well in the sense that we, at the moment, have just compared, what ATD has previously done, in order to see what data points we'll be focusing on. So we've not addressed this yet. So I see Louis is here, so hopefully Louis or Xena might also be able to chip in something.
Yes, thanks, colleague. I'm actually. Hi, Prof. Bala. Nice to see you.
Hi, Louis. How's it?
I'm fine, thanks. I'm fine, thanks. I actually want to chip in there. Firstly, on the first comment, as Zina has said, we are an institution that has to have a good mix of vocational learning, which means most of our programs have work-integrated learning embedded in them. Unlike your traditional universities, which means our students have to do a lot of practicals and work with industry and different companies. And the impact of COVID on all of that, of those logistics and arrangements, you can imagine that for such students, is a double blow in terms of disturbance in the actual academic learning as well as disturbance in the practical learning. For some students, this may delay their graduation because they have to meet certain criteria in terms of practicals hours that are accredited to their programs. So we need to, that is why we need to understand our context and what it means for a student in a UOT to actually graduate, and what other challenges besides the academic challenges that mostly the SIA project focuses on, and not on the other arrangements such as will and practical learning. In terms of the finances hold, we are actually working on a project. We're busy with the data analysis. I like the presentation earlier on from UCT, which showed that actually the first step of any kind of this project is to understand the data and what the data tells you. Learn from those insights and the emerging trends to actually develop interventions. Now we are actually busy analyzing data in terms of those financial goals and what financial challenges students may have. In particular, because we know that students are actually not completing because of owing fees and other related financial matters that are not actually, if you were to put the value of how much they owe and the value of actually them receiving the degree, you will find that the value of them achieving the degree outweighs the value of us not giving them qualifications because they don't meet certain financial standards. So what we have done is, what we are trying to come up with is an intervention that we will identify those students and actually find ways to work together with them and industry to assist them in that way. Also, it's a good benefit for the institution because we get their output subsidy as well as the input subsidy as soon as they graduate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louis. We're running a little bit late, but thank you very much for the input. Just to tell you, you're not going to be alone. The traditional university is also trying to occupy the space, getting the students working closely with industry. So you're not going to be alone anymore. Thank you very much. There is one more comment in the chat, and I would ask the team to please respond to Emmanuel's comment on the chat. We have to move on to the next presentation. So thank you. Well done, CPUT, and we look forward to your success shortly. Well done. We're now moving on to the next presentation from Northwest University. The importance of student support structures when using blended learning in legal education, and the title doesn't suggest there's illegal education, and I'm sure Ninette Crous will actually inform us on that. Over to you, Ninette.
Good morning, colleagues, and thank you for the opportunity to present at this conference. As stated, my title is The Importance of Student Support Structures when using blended learning in legal education. The NWU first years arrived on the relevant campuses at the beginning of 2020, excited for the new journey ahead, and maybe with some sense of fear for the unknown. They were wanting to join in on the activities. But during March 2020, President Cyril Ramaphosa had to announce a national lockdown as a result of the worldwide COVID-19 pandemic. And this obviously changed the landscape of learning and teaching for students and lecturers, as we had to adapt and adapt quickly. Fortunately for the NWU, we've already adapted a blended learning approach. And our teaching and learning policy refers to the definition of Garrison and Paul. It's innovative teaching and learning design. It combines the best of face-to-face and online teaching and learning approaches. It integrates thoughtfully selected complementary teaching and learning methodologies and technologies. It's based on educational merit. It's determined by factors such as the educational context, the nature of the discipline, the learning material, the profile of your students, and it blends these strengths so that we have a unique learning experience. The NWU University has 3 sites of delivery, and we offer the LLB program, the LLB Extended program, BCom Law, and BA Law. The focus for this presentation will be especially on the first-year students and their experiences of using a tutoring system and an academic peer mentor system. The tutoring system is a senior student appointed to tutor the students in a small group setting, either using online methods or face-to-face. And this is done on a weekly basis. The academic peer mentor is a senior student from second year and the few postgraduate students who act as a friend, as a counselor, as somebody who guides the student, who helps them to adjust. So just as a preliminary caution, this is preliminary research. A lot more information and data will need to be analyzed and recovered before we can make a final conclusion and recommendation. Against this background, the research methodology we used was a mixed methodology approach. We used different questionnaires, interviews, data analysis. We also make use of the Bussy survey as indicated by our previous speakers. This helped us to determine our students' expectations when they arrive at university. We're specifically considering the students' expectations when they arrive at university, comparing that to the reality of what is actually happening and why are students struggling. And then where in this whole picture do you fit in your student support structures, specifically your tutoring system and your academic peer mentor system? We all know that the student voice is extremely important, and we use student surveys because it's multidisciplinary, it's impact research, it's an empirical driver of success. And if we can understand our students, they are the key to our success. We can put them in the middle of anything that we design and implement at an institutional level. And also it enables us to provide quality learning. So for now, we're going to take a look at some of our students' expectations when they arrive at university. This is the Bussy results basically from 2019 and 2020, as we will compare this to the students' experiences when using a tutoring and a mentoring system. As we can see from this graph, overall, our law students expect to do a whole lot better academically than what they did in matric. Are these expectations a bit unrealistic? Or are they of the opinion because they are studying something that they're really going to enjoy and have a passion for, they will automatically do better? As you can see from this, more than about 65% of the law students indicated that they think they will have an average of 70% higher. And which is more concerning, 24% of them said they will have an average of above 80, while only 9% of them achieve that same result in matric. So my experience would be that these expectations might be a bit unrealistic. But what do we as an institution do with our student support structures to manage these expectations? Time spent on academic work. Fortunately, the majority of the students are of the opinion that they will have to spend more time on the academic work at university than what they did in matric. It is a bit concerning that 15% of them are of the opinion that 1 to 5 hours will be sufficient. Whereas about almost 62% of the law lecturers in the faculty agree that students should spend at least 20 hours on their academics. Whereas only 50% of students think more than 16 hours will be sufficient. So is what we as lecturers expect from our students and what our students expect to put in already so vastly different that we cannot meet and cannot agree to be on the same page with regards to time spent on academics? But what about our students' capabilities? These statistics doesn't include any APA scores or placement tests or any of those measures that meet, according to us, a student's preparedness or readiness or acceptance into a program. These are what the students think, how prepared they are. How well do they think their capabilities rate? We considered writing, speaking, the ability to think critically and analytically, and then obviously learn effectively on your own. These soft skills are extremely important and vital for law students to be successful, not only during their studies, but as future legal practitioners. And I think a lot of the different disciplines will agree with the ability to do these skills well should translate in the ability to perform well academically. So 90% of the students were positive and very confident in their writing skills that they can communicate effectively. 87% in speaking. And this is mostly in an English language, which the majority of the students had as a second language or is not a home language for them. Their ability to think critically and analyze, 88% were confident. 92% of them were confident that they can learn effectively on their own. So overall, the students were extremely positive. They think highly of their own capabilities, and they also expect themselves to do extremely well at university. It might be that students aren't saying the extreme positive at the beginning of the year because it's a new journey that's waiting for them and they are excited and they only think about the positives. Which is also interesting is about a third of these students wanted to pursue a doctorate degree. They've not even started their first law class, but they already see themselves going in that direction. They were also overwhelmingly positive and in the majority answered that they will seek assistance when needed. They will ask a lecturer for help. They will even read and watch additional resources to make sure that they understand the content. And if they do not receive the results, they were more than 90% sure that they will be able to overcome initial disappointments. So even though the students are extremely positive, they think highly of their capabilities, 96% of them were of the opinion that the university should still provide support. So we can gather from this that we have students that arrive at university who have very high expectations of themselves, who are extremely positive. They believe in their own capabilities. That might be true or it might not be true. But what is the reality? What actually happens at the university level? The CHE report on the National Review of the LLB program in November 2018 dealt specifically with student recruitment, selection, admission, and support. And this report is based on the HIMSS data from graduation rates, and this paints quite a different picture. Only a third of the students nationally will complete their LLB studies within the minimum 4-year period. Slightly more than 50% graduate within 6 years. And the real concerning figure, 45% of the students fail to graduate after 6 years of an LLB. So students arrive at university, positive, excited, thinking highly of their capabilities. What happens? Why are these figures so completely different from what the students expect? Are the expectations unrealistic? Are the expectations too high? Are they able to adapt to university? Do they actually seek assistance when they need it? Are they able to overcome disappointments? And in my personal opinion, I think this is the perfect place to structure your student support structures. How do you implement and use them so that you're able to form a bridge so that you can help the students from when they arrive at university and to be able to have a successful journey and complete their degrees? If not within the minimum time period, then at least within the maximum time period. Our tutors and mentors play an important role. We must remember that students arrive at university with no real background on what it entails to be a law student. There's not a subject at school that can really prepare you for this new journey and this new career that you want to study in. So the academic peer mentors can really assist the students with providing them with practical advice, tips and guidelines. How do you study law? How do I approach these modules? What is this new legal jargon? How do I become comfortable in it? I'm maybe already studying in a language that's not my home language, and now there's all these legal jargon, which sometimes doesn't make sense, especially in the beginning. And this is where these senior students form an important role. They can assist and guide the students. They can advise them. They can be that friend, that mentor for the students. And the same with your tutorials. If you have one tutorial per week, whether it's in an online method or a contact method, and you can use that session to prepare the students for the contact or the online formal lecture, students can go to class prepared. Yesterday, one of the keynote speakers said, lecturing should be fun and you should enjoy it. And I 100% agree with him. What is more fun than having a class in front of you that did their reading, that are prepared, they understand the theoretical content, and you can have a high impact, engaging, interactive class, focusing on the application part of the law. But that can only happen if all the students in your class are on the same level of preparedness. What happens if your students maybe don't have a tutorial system, or there is no support available, but you still expect them to have certain work done before a class? What will inevitably happen is 75% of your class, or maybe 50% of your class, are not prepared. They didn't do the reading. They do not know what you're talking about. So you as a lecturer are now forced to go back to the basics and first explain the theoretical concepts, which is frustrating for the 25% or other half of the class that did their work and are prepared, because they do not get the opportunity to have the engaging, interactive application class. So it's extremely important that the tutorials are linked with your formal lectures. There should be good communication between them, because students can feel overwhelmed. If our tutorials are not properly structured, there's no incentive for them to attend. It's maybe not compulsory, even though I don't think that plays the biggest part thereof. They can feel as though it is only something that's added onto an already full and overloaded schedule. So now they see a tutorial and they think, oh, this is just something else that I need to attend. Another list on an already growing list of things that I need to attend to today. So if the students are not going to receive value, if what is done in a tutorial is repeated in a class session or vice versa, students are going to feel like it's an unnecessary burden. Our academic peer mentors are generally not something that's compulsory for our first-year students. They have the option to seek them and to seek assistance. And I think it's important that the relevant contact details and all of the information and the service that they can provide are actually sent to the students so that they can reach out and make use of the services. I think the advantages, there's so many, but if we want to name a few, if you have a proper implemented student support, specifically referring to tutorials and academic peer mentors, you provide a support circle and environment for your students. They're building a network. These people are all going to be in practice one day, so they already have contacts. This is far more reaching than just at a university or educational level. They are able to engage with others. And I think this is important, especially while at some institutions we're still doing remote or online learning, and students are not necessarily sitting in a classroom together. But with tutorials, they still have that option to engage in a smaller group setting. They can engage with the content of the module. It ensures that your students are prepared for your formal lectures, whether it's online or in a contact mode, or contact or online. So it can be prepared for Thank you. They can be prepared for this assessments. They will know what to expect. They can manage their expectations. And I think this is important as it links with the expectation when they arrive and the reality of how many of them will graduate. And hopefully those throughput rates will improve as well. They will be able to ask questions. Students gain confidence from asking questions in a smaller group setting, and then they have the confidence to ask questions in the larger class. They learn from their senior students. They have somebody that they can go to when they receive a disappointing result that will actually understand what they're going to. Some of these things we as lecturers take for granted. And I think the most important thing is they will become self-directed learners. They will take responsibility for their own studies. I just want to share some feedback with you with regards to our surveys that we sent to the students. So this is the first years that responded, and we combined the reports from 2019 and 2020 as there was no significant difference in the answers, whether the tutorial was an online or a contact method. It's encouraging that the majority of the students that completed the survey also attended tutorial sessions. You will note that even though there was a drop maybe in the students that attended all the sessions from first to second semester, more of the students attended at least one tutorial session. If the tutorials were linked to their classes, the overwhelming majority said yes. And I think this is an extremely positive factor, as it shows there's good communication between the tutor and the relevant lecturer of the module to make sure that it's properly linked and it's a continuation, or you have to prepare for class, not something disjointed and on its own. I always state that if a tutor, or actually if any student recommends something to a friend, to a peer, there is value in it. They trust and believe in it. 90% of our first year said they would recommend tutorials to their friends. And if we asked them if they want tutorials available in their second year, because it was only a first year program at that stage, 96.8% of them said yes. So even students that did not attend a tutorial still wanted the option of tutorials available for their second year. So they do believe in the value thereof. 78.6% indicated that the tutorials addressed their concerns, and 78.9% said the academic performance improved. When we compared the marks of students that attended at least one tutorial session,
2 minutes remain.
Thank you, I'm almost done. And students who didn't attend any tutorial sessions, there was definitely between 5 and 10% difference in their average marks. So clearly, engaging with content with your peers makes a huge difference. Shortly, only about 60% of our tutors, of our first year students had contact with a mentor. 75% of them indicated that the mentor was able to assist, but 93% of them wanted mentors available in their second year. We also had a small pilot project where our identified at-risk students were assigned or allocated to a specific mentor who had to guide them during the year. They had to report to that mentor. They had to at least meet with them once a month, and overwhelming those students' marks improved from the year that they didn't, from the previous year, which had poor academic performance, to a year which they had very good academic performance. And this can be attributed to somebody holding them accountable, having a peer to contact, having a route of who to ask. So to end off or to conclude, sometimes the best that we have is to say that tomorrow is another day, but at least this is a starting point. We have some information available to tell us what the students want and what they need, and how to properly structure this to best suit our students and to use in a blended learning environment. Tutors and mentors play a vital role to help our students to develop their skills, to become self-directed learners. They help the students to adapt to changing circumstances. They help them to be prepared, to know what to expect. Nobody likes uncertainty. The student support structures is an important cog in the wheel of blended learning. And our goal is to ensure that our NWU law graduates receive the best possible education and training to ensure that they are equipped to deal with the challenges of the legal profession. Thank you very much.
you, Ninette. Thank you very much. Thanks for taking us back to the classroom. It was very, very good to look at students' expectations and the actual reality in terms of the performance and really interrogating the levels of support they require. Just one quick comment. I'm not sure if you're using the Zondo Commission to give the student exposure to the practical experience.
Well, I think there's definitely certain lecturers that are doing that. I think we are so privileged in the law profession and being in the legal field that you can't switch on your televisions these days and not hear something that has to do with a legal perspective, whether it's a court case that's being shown, whether it's the Zondo Commission. It's so many nice application questions and application that you can engage with your students. But they need that theoretical background to actually be able to engage with those type of conversations.
Great, great. Thank you very much. Now, colleagues, are there any questions? I don't see anything on the chat. Ephraim, can you help me? Are there any questions, Q&As anyway? Oh, there's one. Yeah.
Yes, there's one that has just been dropped in now.
Thank you. Right, let me read that out.
I can read it out for you.
Please go ahead.
Ninette, it seems students at second year feel they still need support. Would you say the problem is with students or academics?
Thank you for that question. I don't necessarily want to answer it by stating that there's a problem with either students or academics. I think it's more a situation as that we should also understand that there's a significant level of understanding that students from first year to second year and second year to third year, that there is a bit of a gap. Suddenly more is expected of you. And I think students feel comfort in having that student support and somebody else that they can reach out to instead of having to their first point is the lecturer. It's always nice to know that other people are in the same situation than you. So I think it's not necessarily a problem. I think it's a good thing that students want to have continuous support while they are studying.
Yeah, if I may, from the chair, comment on that, Emmanuel and Ninette. I think the assumption that many universities is because we have large student numbers and we have first entry students in first year, they are the ones that need this level of support. And come second and third year, there isn't such support. And it's also linked to funding. Many universities rely on soft money to fund these programs. So I think the question is, how do we support students to completion? I don't think it's good enough just to look at supporting students in year one. Folks, any other comments or questions? We have a little bit of time before we move on.
Only one so far.
Okay. All right. Ninette, you mentioned right at the beginning, it's preliminary work, but from what you presented, I think you did present quite a lot of data. How far do you have to go before you feel comfortable that you have sufficient to draw conclusions?
I think we will need at least another year's data to have it at 3 years. And I think the problem was also we thought that the emergency remote online learning would give us a complete different picture than the previous year, where we had the normal blended learning environment. And what is actually astonishing is that the students, their answers about tutorials, for example, didn't differ vastly whether it was an online tutorial or a contact tutorial. Some of them actually preferred the online tutorials, which I think is interesting. So I think at least 3 years data. And then also we want to encourage more students to complete the survey so that we have the majority of our students' answers to the surveys and not maybe only a small population of them.
And since you have a crystal ball, may I ask you then, what's your prediction? How long are we going to be going on with blended learning because of the pandemic? What's your prediction and what are the plans for Northwest University?
I wish I had an answer for that. I think we have to, I think what's important and what we all learned from last year is how quickly people can adapt, whether it's lecturers or students, to a new environment. Obviously, there's certain struggles and socioeconomic backgrounds and people not having access to everything that we would want them. So we're not in an ideal world or an utopia, but we will have to agree that blended learning is here to stay. And I think the lessons that we learned during remote online teaching can only help us in planning our way forward.
Thank you very much for that, to you and your team, and for our delegates and attendees. Thank you very much. We're now moving on to the final presentation of this session. Now we're coming back to the Eastern Seaboard. Those of you who don't know, this is the sardine season in the coastline, KZN coastline. And if you have the opportunity, please visit, perhaps after the pandemic. The next presentation is from DUT, Charmaine Korporaal, and it's on theory of practical tests, enhancing students' learning, critical clinical skills, and a means of assessment. Charmaine, over to you. Okay,
are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and
awesome.
clear.
That was a slight
Great.
technical glitch. Sorry about that.
No problem. Don't worry. Go ahead. You've got 20 minutes and you'll be reminded of your time.
Awesome. Thank you. I am from DUT, specifically the chiropractic department at DUT. So this is a presentation from our health sciences perspective. And as stated earlier, it's the integration of theory and practical in multimodal teaching and learning, the possibilities and challenges. This particular presentation is a case study, so it really wasn't something that was an intentional project that we were going to present. And the context of this particular case study is the third year module of chiropractic principles and practice. It is a module 1, so semester 1 delivery, and it is underpinned by the theoretical constructs of how manipulative therapies and other therapies work within the chiropractic profession and what the clinical implications are for these particular constructs. And we have a practical component that deals with the psychomotor skill development of students within this particular program. Typically, the students learn in a very silo manner and learn the psychomotor skill set outside of the theoretical learning constructs. So the particular subject is individual, internally, and then also not necessarily always related to external subjects. So within the COVID era, we had particular challenges that we had to overcome within the subject. In terms of the online delivery and the multimodal blended learning, the theory constructs underpinning the subject weren't as badly affected in that we could do theory lectures online, we could do tutorials with personalized feedback to the individual students. Unlike the previous speaker, we don't have the facility for tutors and tutorial support perhaps as extensively, so much of the tutorial work is done by the lecturer. The other pro that we had was the ability to grow the student from their own starting point with regards to beginning to understand chiropractic and the world of chiropractic, given that the first 2 years of the program are underpinned by basic sciences. So this is a transition point from basic sciences, anatomy and physiology, to the more clinical sciences, and that often is a bridge that many students are unable to cope with or have difficulty coping with. There were unfortunately no pros for the practical component, and we'll speak a little bit about that as we go through the presentation. In terms of the cons, the online mode of learning did present some limitations in terms of being able to get the students to debate and critically think about the theories that underpin chiropractic practice, partly because students were initially tentative on the online platforms in terms of engaging. but also because the class sizes, although small for us, where we have 35 students in a group, students were still very unsure when to ask questions, how to ask questions, or be stigmatized for asking too many questions. We also had limited time. Previously, this content was delivered in a year-long module in the old program, where now it was a semester module, and this really decreased the time that the students needed for reflective thinking and reflecting on theories that they either did or didn't agree with. In terms of the assessment, one of the cons of the online teaching space is the fairly simplistic way in which true, false, multiple choice and essay formats work, which limited the ability to ask questions in a very much more applied and critical context, which this particular subject required. And then from a face-to-face point of view, we obviously were unable to do practicals from the end of March to the end of September last year, which was a huge chunk of time within that first semester that the students didn't have psychomotor skill development, or potentially so. And then we also had to try and figure out how to do a 3-dimensional assessment of their technique or their manipulative skills in a 2-dimensional way, in addition to trying to integrate the theory and the practical. The one advantage that the students did have is that we had provided them with a flash drive of all their learning material in January at registration. So they had access to their theory notes, their practical manuals, their videos for all the various different techniques, and everything available to them. So when they went away during lockdown and the various alert levels, they did have the ability to take the information away with them fairly easily and fairly readily. So what we were able to do in terms of the delivery of this module was to use highly focused tutorials that linked to their theory work and the background work that they had been given on their flash drive, but it didn't directly speak to regurgitating the work that we presented on MS Teams and other forums. It was more an integration of the basic sciences as well as the theoretical work that was delivered in their lectures in terms of applying it in a practical clinical construct. So in a case presentation where you provide students with a patient case and then ask them using the various theories to describe and deliver a particular treatment to a patient to allow them that contextual ability. We did use Teams quizzes in order for students to revise the various theories, but we did try variations of the various quiz functions so that we had multiple true statements, multiple false statements, and we had students submit a theory, an electronic email basis, the answers to the various quizzes. Even though the true and false appeared on the electronic media, the reasoning behind their choices required a paragraph of explanation in order for them to link it to the concepts. The tests were delivered in a fairly unique way in this particular module. They followed a format that wasn't dissimilar to tests that were previously delivered in the module in the annual program, in that these particular tests are very much applied tests. So given that we did have some instability in the Moodle platform at DUT through the first 3 months of March, April, and May going into June last year, where tests were sometimes cancelled, the Moodle was overloaded and students couldn't gain access, we had load shedding, we had all of those considerations that are listed below to contend with. So the tests were formatted in a very similar way to previous tests, which looked principally at questions where there was applied learning. And given the fact that they couldn't copy and paste from Google or their notes or from any other resource material, it was decided to email and WhatsApp the tests to the students, give them a 12-hour period so they could manage their data, their nighttime data, daytime data, load shedding schedules and everything else, and ask them to submit the test within a 12-hour window. There was no negotiation on whether these tests were accepted after that 12-hour. They had sufficient time to manage. And they also had sufficient time, whether they were typing on their phones, typing on computers, or however they were responding, in order to complete the test. In terms of the lecturers, we had no issues with the students communicating with each other in terms of discussing questions. In fact, if they did have any discussion time behind the scenes, it would potentially have enabled a very large and very rich learning process for them, given that they would still have to type a response unique to their position. And as an example, for each of you, you will have different body shapes and sizes. So interacting with a patient of a particular type, say 170 kilogram patient that's coming in with low back pain, your unique response and how you treat that patient with a particular manipulative technique is going to be very much suited to your body style. So the answers that students gave had to keep in mind their clinical physical limitations and being able to apply the various different techniques. So no one answer could be the same throughout a whole student cohort. So these tests were very specific in trying to target those whilst looking at all these considerations and limitations below. We did also have a consideration initially to include an international collaboration, not in the testing procedure, but as part of the focus tutorials and the engagement, which we then did later on in this particular module. From a practical point of view, we had significant limitations in that we had legal limitations in terms of who the students could practice on. And we developed focus teams of students around the country where we could aggregate these 30 individuals into pairs or trios or quads. And where they didn't have a student partner, we were able to partner them with a practitioner in the field, so as to make sure that both the practitioner and the student were safe in terms of practicing on each other. So we used a very much team-based approach in order to be able to get them to practice regularly. And the team-based approach also allowed for questions and answer sessions, both between myself via a WhatsApp link to these particular groups on a weekly basis, but also between the practitioner who was leading a group in various different areas. And then what was unique was the development of the theory of practical test. And this particular theory of practical test, although not a prac test per se, was a test that was developed with particular focus on the thinking behind the development of the psychomotor skill. So the first 3 sections looked at the review of the assessment of the patient. We looked at the critical analysis of the technique that they would implement, and then we looked at various clinical scenarios and what they would implement within those clinical scenarios with the reasons behind it. And then we supplied the students in the last question with either a video or a photo of several different practitioners performing a particular technique, and then asking the students to rate these practitioners against a rubric that the students would normally be assessed against in a face-to-face evaluation of their own technique or skill. The aim behind this was to make the student more critically aware of what it is that they were doing whilst they were practicing in their groups, so that the feedback between the students would improve. So we prepared the students for these various different assessments, particularly the theory of prac, which was new to them, by giving them sample questions through the tutorial feedback mechanism. We gave them individualized feedback to the responses that they sent through to us. We encouraged the students to ask questions in their smaller group, which seemed to work fairly effectively. They had the practitioner network and the lecturer network and interaction and support available to them. The only thing we did find that we need to do was to allow the students to be trained on MS Teams as a platform for the collaborations with myself as the lecturer, but also with their little peer groups, their peer teacher when they didn't have face-to-face meetings. So we had to show them how to use the MS Teams platform. Some of them did default back to a WhatsApp network, but that really didn't bother us as the staff. In terms of the outcomes for the students over this particular COVID period, we didn't really have a significant change in terms of the marks, but what we did find in terms of the unintended outcomes was that the students were better able to answer clinically related questions. They were better able to improve and contextualize patients' problems and explaining that to the patient. The questions they were asking were more succinct and more pertinent, and they were better able to explain manipulation to the patient in various different patient case contexts. And in semester 2, we found that after we gave them a period of practical face-to-face training, that they also had improved confidence over the previous year's students. So if we looked at the marks from 2018, 2019, and 2020, these ones on the left-hand side were face-to-face assessments. On the right-hand side, we had the theory of prac. So in terms of the aggregate mark over that time period, we found that the marks were pretty much on par. In terms of the exam marks, specifically with the practical, these two were face-to-face. In semester 1, we had a 57% outcome, which is slightly lower than those in the previous years. And I suspect here that this is related to the fact that they had less face-to-face time or less ability to have face-to-face time in the psychomotor development. So the speed of their adjustment was a lot slower than their peers at the same time point. But overall, if we included their practical mark, the theory mark, the aggregate of marks collectively was very much the same. So in semester 1, their theory mark improved substantially in terms of the integration of their knowledge, where their practical was a bit lower. So this is an area that we need to look at and maybe support the theory of practice a little bit more greatly, particularly as it is a good alternative for assessing students in a non-face-to-face context, but with the same content. And as you can see with the second semester after, so that would have been September to November, beginning of December last year, the students were given direct face-to-face contact in those, what would have been 8 or 10 weeks, and their practical mark did improve over that time. Unfortunately, the second semester theory component is not the same, so there is no comparison that can be made there. From a student perspective, the students were obviously initially apprehensive, but were reassured by the tutorials that were provided and the network of support they had amongst themselves and with the practitioners and lecturers. What they did report to be grateful for was the past papers in terms of the theory component, given that the papers didn't substantially change like many of the other subjects where the online format of the testing was very different when compared to previous years. They appreciated the fact that the test dates for this particular module stayed static, where many of the other modules either changed to weekly, smaller assessments on the online platforms, or the test dates kept changing in response to the load shedding, in response to the Moodle instability, in response to various factors that were sometimes outside of their control, where in this particular subject, the use of the WhatsApp and the email allowed for the dates to remain a lot more static. Many students came back in the second semester and said that they appreciated the brain stretching, the autonomy, and the educated guesses they could make in a fairly safe space, given that we were in a fairly networked environment. And it was something that they weren't used to coming out of the basic sciences, where everything was very much black and white, and the answer was either right or wrong, where in a clinical context, the situation is oftentimes a lot more gray. They appreciated external lecturer input. They had the ability to explore on their own, given that they had all the material available to them ahead of time, and then tutorials that made them explore these various aspects of the notes and material that they had been given. And then they appreciated the lecturer availability, given that a lot of this was asynchronous and different groups met at different times, and it was sometimes difficult for them to overcome the challenges on their side, where responses electronically or via WhatsApp were always readily available from the lecturer. So from a student perspective, given that we do student evaluation questionnaires, I took a few comments from these questionnaires, and unfortunately there weren't a lot of comments that were provided, so I took what was there. So I'm just going to allow these to flick onto the screen so you can read them. But in essence, I think that the students really appreciated the flexibility given that they were under a lot of stress with all the academic work that they had to do, and that this subject provided a little bit of flexibility and a network within which they could operate that still allowed them to move forward without necessarily being obstructive in any way or not allowing them to grow. One of the things I think they found really helpful was being able within this network to manage expectations and know what was coming, given the uncertainty of everything else that was happening around them. In addition to that, the networking, both with the practitioners and some of the external practitioners did do some guest lectures, did allow them to also understand the clinical context for which they were preparing themselves. So going forward, the module will retain, as it has before, the tutorials, the theory tests, and the face-to-face practicals. But the module will definitely retain now going forward the theory of practice, the inclusion of a networking group of both practitioners as both supervisors of practical work, as well as interactive lectures. And then in terms of future considerations, we're also looking at integrating guest lecturers and providing other perspectives from a global perspective to help integrate into the debate points as far as the theoretical constructs underpinning this particular subject. So in terms of this particular response to the pandemic, having taken into account all of that which happened last year, it was a very organically grown, pragmatic process done in consultation with the students. It really looked at multiple different approaches to supporting teaching, learning, and assessment. And although this particular approach worked with the class size, the practitioner network, and the legal limitations within our profession, it may not necessarily work with anybody else. But I was encouraged to submit this in order to allow others to perhaps learn from this approach, and I hope that it has provided you with maybe a different way of looking at things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charmaine. Thank you very much for sharing that. It was quite insightful. And I think we're going to be looking at any comments or questions while we wait for that. I like that expression, stretching my brain. So anatomically, is the brain elastic?
Not physically elastic, but in terms of the connectedness of the neurons, I think it is possible to stimulate different networks of neurons that potentially remain dormant if you don't utilize certain aspects of your thinking capacity.
Very light-hearted question. Thank you for the response. A question I have, the professional body,
Yes.
have they had any input into these changes, especially the practical approach? Or, I mean, how do they view these changes? Or have you had any feedback?
They haven't really. I mean, in the past, we were definitively not allowed to utilize any online learning platform as a means of being able to engage with students and allowing students to be taught in a manner that wasn't face-to-face. But given the COVID pandemic, I think the environment kind of necessitated a need for change without disadvantaging students or increasing their length of study by a year purely because delivery was not possible. So the council really did take a step back and kind of left it to the institutions and said, do what you can to enable the situation. And we will have to go back and relook at what has happened once we've gotten through the bulk of this. Just make sure that whatever approach you take, that you ensure patient safety, you ensure student safety, and you allow for learning to continue. So from their perspective, I think it was something that they were not necessarily anticipating, and we didn't really have a guideline to follow.
Okay. But well done. I think you did well given the challenges. Are there any questions if I'm on the system? I don't see any.
I don't see any questions. I just see comments. There's one that has just dropped in. Let me see. No, it's a comment as well.
Well, we'll just read it for you. From Ku Parker, DUT to everyone. There was much discussion yesterday and the day before about assessments, doctoring, etc. This is very innovative way of addressing the problem of practical assessments, but also emphasizes the role of students in co-creating the learning. That's a comment. If I may ask you, you showed us some results. Was that the average results of students in the class? These were in the 60s, is that correct?
Yes, that is the average result for the student cohort as a group. Usually the average varies from between the upper 30s, lower 40s to the upper 80s. And the majority will sit between 55 and 70. And that sort of curve distribution is something that has remained unchanged over time, even with this response to the COVID pandemic. There is a question here.
Yes, there is a question now. How did you decide on the amount of time to give students to complete their work?
It was a negotiated time frame which looked at including into the considerations the various elements of load shedding, the students' timetable at that particular point in time. We also, in some instances, had to look at religious observances to make sure that the time that was allocated accounted for the various different student concerns, complexities in terms of their life. And in most of these tests would in a face-to-face situation have been 3 hours long. So they would have had to have enough time within that 12-hour period to complete that 3-hour test, given all the other logistical considerations. And I think for myself, the biggest consideration really was the access to nighttime data for those students that didn't have access to daytime data or had exhausted data or hadn't had data replenished. So from those type of considerations, we collectively came to a consideration that 12 hours would be the most appropriate and the fairest for each of the students within the class.
Okay, so I don't think we have any more questions. We're getting close to completion. If I may, I'd like to thank all the presenters. I think they were excellent presentations, and thank you for sharing that with us, and to all the attendees. Thank you very much. The session was quite well represented. We were very close to 40 attendees. So thank you very much. And you have a well-deserved break until the next session at 3 o'clock. So please enjoy the break. Thank you very much.
I do encourage you to join the 4th concurrent session. I have put the link in the chat. There's a final presentation taking place between 22 and 10 past 12 now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.